Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We've got some Shadows over Innistrad remastered draft going on in the background, and we're going to be reading a short story. Today I'm bringing you The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Stetson. Let's get into it. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I proudly declare that there's something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And why have stood so long untenanted? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith and intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and of great relief to my mind. Perhaps that's one reason why I do not get well faster. You see, he doesn't believe that I'm sick, and what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there really is nothing the matter but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? My brother's also a physician, also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and journeys and air and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I'm well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it or else be met with heavy opposition. I sometimes fancy, in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus. But John says the very worst thing I can do is to think about my condition, and I confess it does always make me feel bad. So I will let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It's quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes you really think of English places that you read about, for their hedges, walls, and gates that lock, and lots of little separate houses for gardeners and people. There is a delicious garden. I've never seen such a garden, large and shady, full of box-bordered paths, lined with long grape-covered arbors, with seats under them. There were greenhouses, too, but they're all broken now. There was some legal trouble, I believe. Something to do with the heirs and co-heirs. Anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness, I'm afraid, but I don't care. There's something strange about this house. I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlit evening, but he said what I felt was a draft and shut the window. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I think it's due to this nervous condition, but John says if I feel so, I shall neglect proper self-control. So I take pains to control myself, before him at least. And that makes me so very tired. I don't like our room a bit. I wanted one downstairs that opened onto the piazza and had roses all over the window and such pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings, but John would not hear of it. He said there's only one window and not room enough for 2 beds, nor near room enough for him if he took another. He's very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without any special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour in the day. He takes all care for me, and so I feel basely ungrateful to not value it. He said we came here solely on my account, that I was to have the perfect rest and all the air I could get. Your exercise depends on your strength, my dear, he said, and your food somewhat on your appetite, but air you can absorb all the time, so we took the nursery at the top of the house. It's a big, airy room, the whole floor nearly, with windows that look all ways, and air and sunshine galore. It was a nursery first, then a playroom, then a gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things on the wall. The paint and paper look as if the boys' school had used it. It's stripped off, the paper, in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach, and in a great place on the other side of the room, low down. I never saw worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It's dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard-of contradictions. The color is repellent, almost revoltingly. It's smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by slowly turning sunlight. It's dull, lurid orange in some places, and a sickly sulphur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room for long. Oh, there comes John. I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. We have been here for 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing before since that first day. I'm sitting by the window now, up in this atrocious nursery, and there's nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save the lack of strength. John is away all day, and even some nights, when his cases are serious. I'm glad my case is not that serious, but nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there's no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Of course, it is only nervousness. It does weigh on me so not to do my duty in any way. I meant to be in such help to John, and such a real rest and comfort, and here I am, a comparative burden already. Nobody would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able to do, to dress and entertain and order things. It's fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, such a dear baby, and yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I suppose John was never nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. At first he meant to repaper the room, but afterwards he said I was letting it get the better of me, and that nothing was worse than for a nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. He said after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then the gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. You know, the place is doing you good, he said, and really, dear, I don't care to renovate the house just for 3 months' rental. Then do let us go downstairs, I would say, and there's so much pretty rooms down there. Then he would take me into his arms and call me a blessed little goose, and said he would go down to the cellar if I wished, and have it whitewashed into the bargain. But he's right enough about the beds and the windows and things. It is an airy and comfortable room as anyone may need wish, and of course I would not be so silly as to make him uncomfortable just for a whim. I'm really getting quite fond of this big room, all but that horrid wallpaper. Out one window I can see the garden and those mysterious deep-shaded arbors and the righteous old-fashioned flowers and bushes and gnarly trees. At another I get a lovely view of the bay and a little private wharf belonging to the estate. There's such a beautiful shaded lane that runs down there from the house. I always fancy I see people walking in those numerous paths and arbors, but John has cautioned me not to give way to fancy in the least. He says that with my imaginative power and habit of story-making, and nervous weakness of mine is sure to lead to all manner of excited fancies, and that I ought to use my will and good sense to check the tendency. So I try. I think sometimes that if I were only well enough to write a little bit, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me, but I find that I get pretty tired when I try. It is so discouraging not to have any advice and companionship about my work. When I get really well, John says we will ask Cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit, but he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcases to let me have those stimulating people around me. I wish I could get better faster, but I must not think about that. This paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There is a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck, and 2 bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd, unblinking eyes are everywhere. There's one place where 2 breaths didn't match, and the eyes go all up and down the line, one a little higher than the other. I never saw so much expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. I remember what a kindly wink the knobs of our big old bureau used to have. And there was one chair that always seemed like a strong friend. I used to feel that if any of the other things looked too fierce, I could always hop into that chair and be safe. The furniture in this room is no worse than inharmonious. However, we had to bring it all from downstairs. I suppose when this was used as a playroom, they had to take the nursery things out, and no wonder. I never saw such ravages as the children have made here. The wallpaper, as I said before, is torn off in spots, and it sticketh closer than a brother. It must have had perseverance as well as hatred. Then the floor is scratched and gouged and splintered, and the plaster itself is dug out here and there. And this great heavy bed, which is all we found in the room, looks as if it had been through wars. But I don't mind it a bit, only the paper. There comes John's sister. Such a dear girl is she, and so careful of me. I must not let her find me writing. She is a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper, and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe that she thinks it is writing which made me sick, but I can write when she is out, and I can see her a long way off from these windows. There is one that commands the road, a lovely shaded winding road, and one that looks off over the country, a lovely country too, full of great elms and velvet meadows. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights, and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded, and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to skulk about behind that silly and conspicuous front design. Oh, there's the sister at the stairs. Well, the 4th of July is over. The people are all gone, and I'm tired out. John thought it might do me some good to have a little company, so we had my mother and Nellie and the children down for the week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now, but it tired me out all the same. John says if I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to Weir Mitchell in the fall. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she says it is just like John and my brother, only more so. Besides, it is such an undertaking to go so far. I don't feel as if it was worthwhile to turn my hand over for anything, and I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing. I cry at most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here, or anybody else, but when I'm alone. And I'm alone a good deal just now. John is kept in town most often by serious cases, and Jenny is good and lets me alone when I want her to. So I walk a little in the garden or down in that lovely lane and sit on the porch under the roses and lie down up here a good deal. I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper, perhaps because of the wallpaper. It dwells on my mind so. I lie here on the great immovable bed. It's nailed down, I believe, and follow the pattern about an hour. It's just as good as gymnastics, I assure you. I start, we'll say at the bottom, down in the corner over there where it has not been touched, and I determine for the 1000th time that I'll follow its pointless pattern to some sort of conclusion. I know a little of the principle of design, and I know this thing is not arranged on the laws of radiation or alternation or repetition or symmetry or anything else that I've heard of. It is repeated, of course, by the breadths, but not otherwise. Looked at in one way, each breadth stands alone, the bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque, with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. But on the other hand, they connect diagonally, and the sprawling outlines run off in great slanting waves of optic horror, like a lot of wallowing seaweeds in a full chase. The whole thing goes horizontally, too. At least, it seems so, and I exhaust myself in trying to distinguish the order of its going in that direction. They have used horizontal breadth for a frieze, and adds wonderfully to the confusion. There is one end of the room where it's almost intact, and there, where the cross lights fade and the low sun shines directly upon it, I can almost fancy radiation. After all, the indeterminable grotesque seems to form around the common center and rush off headlong plunges of equal direction. It makes me tired to follow it. I'll take a nap, I guess. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. I don't feel able. and I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel, and I think in some way it's such a relief. But the effort is getting greater than the relief. Half the time now I'm awfully lazy and lie down ever so much. John says I mustn't lose my strength, and has me take cod liver oil and lots of tonics and things, say nothing of the ale and wine and rare meat. Dear John, he loves me dearly, and hates to have me sick. I tried to have a real, earnest, reasonable talk with him the other day, and tell him how I wish he wouldn't let me go and just make a visit to Cousin Henry and Julia, but he said I wasn't able to go, nor able to stand it after I got there. And I did not make out a very good case for myself because I was crying before I had finished. It's getting to be a great effort for me to think straight. Just this nervous weakness, I suppose. And dear John gathered me up in his arms and carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed and sat by me and read to me till it tired my head. He said I was his darling, his comfort and all he had, and that I must take care of myself for his sake and keep well. He says no one but myself can help me out of it, and that I must use my will and self-control, and not let any silly fancies run away with me. There's one comfort. The baby is well and happy, and doesn't have to occupy this nursery with the horrid wallpaper. If we had not used it, the blessed child would have. What a fortunate escape! Why, I wouldn't have a child of mine, an impressionable little thing, live in such a room for worlds. I've never thought of it before, but it's lucky that John kept me here after all. I can stand it so much easier than a baby, you see. Of course, I never mention it to them any more. I'm too wise, but I keep watch of it all the same. There are things in that paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Behind that outside pattern, the dim shapes get clearer every day. It's always the same shape, only very numerous. It is like a woman stooping down and creeping about behind that pattern. I don't like it a bit. I wonder. I begin to think. I wish John would take me away from here. It is so hard to talk with John about my case, because he's so wise, and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around, just as the sun does. I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly, and always comes in one window or another. John was asleep, and I hated to waken him. So I kept still, and watched the moonlight on that undulating wallpaper till I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern, just as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel and see if the paper did move. When I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he said. "Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I was really not gaining here, and that I wished he would take me away. "My darling," he said, "our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I can't see how to leave before. The repairs are not done at home, and I cannot possibly leave town just now. Of course, if you were in danger, I could and would. But you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I am a doctor, dear, I know. You are gaining flesh and color. Your appetite is better. I feel really much easier about you." "I don't weigh a bit more," I said. "Nor as much, and my appetite may be better in the evening when you are here, but it's worse in the morning when you are away." "Bless her little heart," he said, with a big hug. "She shall be as sick as she pleases. But now, let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep and talking about it in the morning." "And you won't go away?" I asked gloomily. "Why, how can I, dear? It is only 3 weeks more, and then we will take a nice little trip of a few days while Jenny is getting the house ready. Really, dear, you are better." "Better in body, perhaps," I began, and then stopped short, for he sat up straight and looked at me with a stern, reproachful look, and I could not say another word. "My darling," he said, "I beg of you, for my sake, for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you never for one instant let that idea enter your mind. There's nothing so dangerous, so fascinating to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so? So, of course, I said no more on that score, and we went to sleep before long. He thought I was asleep first, but I wasn't, and I lay there for hours trying to decide whether that front pattern and the back pattern really did move together or separately. On a pattern like this, by daylight, there's a lack of sequence, a defiance of law that is constant irritant to a normal mind. The color is hideous enough, and unreliable enough, and infuriating enough, but the pattern is torturing. You think you have mastered it, but just as you get well underway in following, it turns a back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples upon you. It's like a bad dream. The outside pattern is a florid arabesque, reminding one of a fungus, if you can imagine a toadstool in joints, an interminable string of toadstools budding and sprouting in endless convolutions. Why, that is something like it. That is, sometimes. There's one marked peculiarity about this paper, a thing that nobody seems to notice but myself, and that is that it changes as the light changes. When the sun shoots through the east window, I always watch for the first long, straight ray. It changes so quickly that I can never quite believe it. That is why I watch it always. By moonlight, the moon shines in all the night when there is moon. I wouldn't know it was the same paper. At night, in any kind of light, in twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all by moonlight, it becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean, and the woman behind it as plain as can be. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that showed behind the dim sub-pattern, but now I am quite sure it is a woman. By daylight, she's subdued, quiet. I fancy it is a pattern that keeps her so still. It's so puzzling. It keeps me quiet by the hour. I lie down ever so much now. John says it is good for me, and to sleep all I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. It is a very bad habit, I'm convinced, for you see, I don't sleep, and that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell him I'm awake. Oh no, the fact is, I'm getting a little afraid of John. He seems very queer sometimes, and even Jenny has an inexplicable look. It strikes me occasionally, just as a scientific hypothesis, that perhaps it is the paper. I've watched John when he did not know I was looking, and come into the room suddenly on the most innocent excuses, and I've caught him several times looking at the paper. And Jenny, too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room. When I asked her, in a very quiet voice, with the most restrained manner possible, what she was doing with the paper, she turned around, as if she had been caught stealing, and looked quite angry, and asked me why I should frighten her so. Then she said that the paper stained everything it touched, that she had found yellow smooches on all my clothes and John's, and she wished we'd be more careful. Did not that sound innocent? But I know she was studying that pattern, and I am determined that nobody should find it out but myself. Life is so much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, to look forward to watch. I really do eat better, and I'm more quiet than I was. John is so pleased to see me improve. He laughed a little the other day, and said I seemed to be flourishing in spite of my wallpaper. I turned it off with a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it was because of the wallpaper. He would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. I don't want to leave now until I've found it out. There's a week more, and I think that will be enough. I'm feeling ever so much better. I don't sleep much at night, for it's so interesting to watch developments, but I sleep a good deal in the daytime. In the daytime, it's tiresome and perplexing. There's always new shoots on the fungus and new shades of yellow all over it. I can't keep count of them, though I have tried conscientiously. It's the strangest yellow, that wallpaper. It makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw, not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. But there's something else about that paper. The smell. I noticed it the moment we came into the room. But with so much air and sun, it wasn't bad. Now that we've had a week of fog and rain, and whether the windows are open or not, the smell is here. It creeps all over the house. I find it hovering in the dining room, skulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, lying in wait for me on the stairs. It even gets in my hair. Even when I go to ride, if I turn my head suddenly and surprise it, there's that smell. Such a peculiar odor, too. I have spent hours trying to analyze it, to find what it smelled like. It's not bad. At first, and very gentle, but quiet. The subtlest, most enduring odor I've ever met. In this damp weather, it's awful. I have to wake up in the night and find it hanging over me. It used to disturb me at first. I thought seriously of burning the house to reach the smell, but now I'm used to it. The only thing I can think of is that it is like the color of the paper, a yellow smell. There's a funny mark on this wall, low down near the mopboard, a streak that runs around the room. It goes behind every piece of furniture except the bed, a long, straight, even smooch, as if it had rubbed over and over. I wonder how it was done, and who did it, and what they made it for. Round and round, round and round and round. It makes me tizzy. I really have discovered something at last. Though watching so much at night when it changes so, I've finally found it out. The front pattern does move. And no wonder. The woman behind shakes it. Sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one. And she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. Then, in the very bright spots, she keeps still. And in the very shady spots, she just takes hold of the bars and shakes hard. She is all the time trying to climb through, but nobody could climb through that pattern. It strangles so. I think that's why it has so many heads. They get through, and then the pattern strangles them off and turns them upside down and makes their eyes white. If those heads were covered or taken off, it would not be half so bad. I think the woman gets out in the daytime, and I'll tell you why, privately. I've seen her. I can see her out of every one of my windows. It's the same woman, I know, for she's always creeping, and most women do not creep by daylight. I see her in that long, shaded lane, creeping up and down. I see her in those dark grape arbors, creeping around the garden. I see her in that long road under the trees, creeping along. And when a carriage comes, she hides under the blackberry vines. I don't blame her a bit. It must be very humiliating to be caught creeping in the daylight. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I can't do it at night, for I know John would suspect something at once. And John is so queer now, I don't want to irritate him. I wish he would take another room. Besides, I don't want anybody to get that woman out at night but myself. I often wonder if I could see her out of all my windows at once, but turn as fast as I can, and I can only see out of one at a time. And though I always see her, she may be able to creep faster than I can turn. I've watched her sometimes away off in the open country, creeping as fast as a cloud shadow in a high wind. If only that top pattern could be gotten off the under one. I mean to try it little by little. I've found another funny thing, but I shan't tell it this time. It does not do to trust people too much. There are only 2 more days to get this paper off, and I believe John is beginning to notice. I don't like the look in his eye, and I heard him ask Jenny a lot of professional questions about me. and she had a very good report to give. She said I slept a good deal at the daytime. John knows I don't sleep very well at night, for I'm so quiet. He asked me all sorts of questions, too, and pretended to be very loving and kind, as if I couldn't see right through him. Still, I don't wonder he acts so, sleeping under this paper for 3 months. It only interests me, but I feel sure that John and Jenny are secretly affected by it. This is the last day, but it's enough. John is to stay in the town over the night and won't be out until this evening. Jenny wanted to sleep with me, the sly thing, but I told her I should undoubtedly rest better for a night all alone. That was clever, for really, I wasn't alone a bit. As soon as it was moonlight, and that poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern, I got up and I ran to help her. I pulled and she shook, and I shook and she pulled, and before morning we had peeled off yards of that paper. A strip about as high as my head and half around the room. And when the sun came and that awful pattern began to laugh at me, I declared I would finish it today. We go away tomorrow, and they are moving all my furniture down again to leave things as they were. Jenny looked at the wall in amazement, but I told her merrily I did it out of pure spite at the vicious thing. She laughed and said she wouldn't mind doing it herself. But I must not get tired. How she betrayed herself at that time! But I'm here, and no person touches this paper but me, not alive. She tried to get me out of the room. It was too packed. But I said it was so quiet and empty and clean now that I believed I would lie down again and sleep all I could, and not wake me, even for dinner. I would call when I woke. So now she's gone, and the servants are gone, and the things are gone, and there's nothing left but the great bedstead nailed down with the canvas mattress we found on it. We shall sleep downstairs tonight and take a boat home tomorrow. I quite enjoy the room now. It is bare again. How those children did tear about here. This bedstead is fairly gnawed, but I must get to work. I have locked the door and thrown the key down in the front path. I don't want to go out, and I don't want to have anybody come in till John comes. I want to astonish him. I've got a rope up here even Jenny did not find. If that woman does get out and tries to get away, I can tie her. But I forgot I could not reach far without anything to stand on. This bed will not move. I tried to lift and push it until I was lame. And then I got so angry I bit off another little piece of the corner, but it hurt my teeth. Then I peeled off all the paper I could reach, standing on the floor. It sticks horribly, and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growths just shriek with derision. I'm getting angry enough to do something desperate. To jump out the window would be an admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong to even try. Besides, I wouldn't do it. Of course not. I know too well that a step like that is improper and might be misconstrued. I don't like to look out of the windows even. There are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper as I did. But I am securely fastened by my well-hidden rope. You don't get me out on the road there. I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that is hard. But it's so pleasant to be out in this room and creep around as I please. I don't want to go inside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. For outside, you have to creep on the ground and everything is green instead of yellow. But here I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits in that long smooch around the wall, so I can't lose my way. Why, there's John at the door. It's no use, young man. You can't open it. How does he call and pound? Now he's crying for an axe. It'd be a shame to break down that beautiful door. John, dear, I said in my gentlest voice, the key is down by the front steps under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, open the door, my darling. I can't, I said. The key is down by the front door under a plantain leaf. And then I said it again several times, very gently and slowly, and I said it so often that he had to go see, and he had got it, of course, and came in. He stopped short by the door. What's the matter? He cried. For God's sake, what are you doing? I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. I've got out at last, I said, in spite of you and Jane. And I pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did. And right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. Our next story is The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, Part 1. It was a dark and soulless day near the end of the year, and clouds were hanging low in the heavens. All day I had been riding on horseback through the country, with little life or beauty, and in the evening I came within view of the House of Usher. I do not know how it was, but my first sight of the building was met with a heavy sense of sadness which filled my spirit. I looked at the scene before me, at the house itself, at the ground around it, at the cold stone walls of the building, at the empty, eye-like windows, at the few dead trees. I looked at this scene, I say, with a complete sadness of soul, which was no healthy, earthly feeling. There was a coldness, a sickening of the heart, in which I could discover nothing to lighten the weight I felt. What was it? I asked myself. What was it that was so fearful, so frightening in my view of the House of Usher? This was a question to which I could find no answer. I stopped my horse beside the building, on the edge of the dark, quiet lake. There, I could see reflected in the water a clear picture of dead trees, and the house and its empty eye-like windows. I was going to spend several weeks in this house of sadness, this house of gloom. Its owner was named Roderick Usher. We'd been friends when we were boys, but many years had passed since our last meeting. A letter from him reached out to me, a wild letter which demanded that I reply by coming to see him. He wrote of an illness of the body, of a sickness of mind, and of a desire to see me, his best and indeed only friend. It was a matter in which all this was said. It was the heart in it, which did not allow me to say no. Although as boys we had been together, I really knew little about my friend. I knew, however, that his family, a very old one, had long been famous for its understanding of all the arts and for many quiet acts of kindness to the poor. I had learned, too, that the family had never been a large one with many branches. The name had passed away from father to son. When people spoke of the House of Usher, they included both the family and the family home. I again looked from the pictures of the house reflected in the lake to the house itself. A strange idea grew in my mind, an idea so strange that I tell it only to show the force of the feeling which laid their weight on me. I really believed that around the whole house and the ground in it, the air itself was different. It was not the air of heaven. It rose from the dead, decaying trees, from the gray walls and the quiet lake. It was a sickly, unhealthy air that I could see slow-moving, heavy and gray. Shaking off my spirit what must have been a dream, I looked more carefully at the building itself. The most noticeable thing about it seemed to be its great age. None of the walls had fallen yet. Stones appeared to be in a condition of advanced decay. Perhaps the careful eye would have discovered in the beginning of a break in the front of the building, a crack making its way from the top down the wall until it became lost in the dark waters of the lake. I rode over a short bridge to the house. A man who worked in the house, a servant, took my horse, and I entered. Another servant, of quiet step, led me without a word through the many dark turnings to the room of his master. Much that I met on my way, I added, I do not know how, to the strangeness of which I had already spoken, while the objects around me, the dark wall coverings, the blackness of the floors, and the things brought home from long-forgotten wars, while these things were like the things I had known since I was a baby, while I admitted to myself all this was only what I had expected, I was still surprised at some of the strange ideas which grew in my mind from these simple things. The room I came into was very large and high. The windows were high and pointed at the top, and so far above the black floor that they were quite out of reach. Only a little light, red in color, made its way through the glass, and served to lighten the nearer and larger objects. My eyes, however, tried and failed to see into the far high corners of the room. The dark coverings hung upon the walls. The many chairs and tables had been used for a long, long time. Books lay around the room, but could give it no sense of life. I felt sadness hanging in everything. No escape from this deep, cold gloom seemed possible. As I entered the room, Usher stood up from where he had been lying and met me with a warmth which at first I could not have believed was real. A look, however, at his face told me every word he spoke was true. We sat down, and for some moments, while he had said nothing, I looked at him with a feeling of sad surprise. Surely, no man had ever before changed as Roderick Usher had. Could this be the friend of my early years? Is it true that his face had always been unusual? He had gray-white skin, eyes large and full of light, lips not bright in color, but a beautiful shape, a well-shaped nose, hair of great softness, a face that was not easy to forget. And now the increase in the strangeness of his face had caused so great a change that I almost did not know him. The horrible white of his skin and the strange light in his eyes surprised me and even made me afraid. His hair had been allowed to grow, and in its softness it did not fall around his face but seemed to lie upon the air. I could not, even with an effort, see in my friend the appearance of a simple human being. In his manner I saw at once changes came and went, and I soon found that this resulted from his attempt to quiet a very great nervousness. I had indeed been prepared for something like this, partly by his letter and partly by remembering him as a boy. His actions were first too quick and then too quiet. Sometimes his voice, slow and trembling with fear, quickly changed to a strong, heavy, carefully paced, too perfectly controlled manner. It was in this manner that he spoke of the purpose of my visit, of his desire to see me, and of the deep delight and strength he expected me to give him. He told me what he believed to be the nature of his illness. It was, he said, a family sickness, and one which he could never hope to grow better. But it was, he added at once, only a nervous illness which would without doubt soon pass away. It showed itself in a number of strange feelings. Some of these, as he had told me of them, interested me, but were beyond my understanding. Perhaps the way in which he told me them added to their strangeness. He suffered much from a sickly increase in the feeling of all his senses. He could only eat the most tasteless foods. All flowers smelled too strongly for his nose. His eyes were hurt even by a little light, and there were few sounds which did not fill him with a kind of horror. A certain kind of sick fear was completely his master's. "I shall die," he said. "I shall die. I must die of this fool's sickness. In this way and no other way, I shall be lost. I fear what will happen in the future, not for what happens, but for the result of what happens. I have indeed no fear of pain, but only fear of its result, of terror. I feel that the time will soon arrive when I must lose my life and my mind and my soul together in some last battle with a horrible enemy, fear." Part 2. Roderick Usher, whom I had known as a boy, was now ill, and had asked me to come to help him. When I arrived, I felt something strange and fearful about the great old stone house, about the lake in front of it, and about Usher himself. He appeared not like a human being, but like a spirit that had come back from beyond the grave. It was an illness, he said, from which he would surely die. He called his sickness fear. I have, he said, no fear of pain, but only fear of its result, of terror. I feel that the time will soon arrive when I must lose my life, my mind, and my soul together in some last battle with that horrible enemy, fear. I learned also, but slowly and through broken words with doubtful meaning, of another strange fact about the condition of Usher's mind. He had certain sick fears about the house in which he lived, and he had not stepped out of it for many years. He felt that the house, with its gray walls and quiet lake around it, had somehow, through the long years, gotten a strong hold on his spirit. He said, however, that much of the gloom which lay so heavily on him was probably caused by something more plainly to be seen, by the long-continued illness, indeed, the coming death, of a dearly loved sister, his only company for many years. Except for himself, she was the last member of his family on earth. When she dies, he said, with a sadness that I can never forget, when she dies, I will be the last of the old family, the House of Usher. While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, for she was so called, passed slowly through a distant part of the room, and without seeing that I was there, went on. I looked at her with complete and wondering surprise, and with some fear, and yet I found I could not explain to myself such feelings. My eyes followed her. When she came to a door and it closed behind her, my eyes turned to the face of her brother, but he had put his face in his hands, and I could see only that the thin fingers through which his tears were flowing were whiter than ever before. The illness of the Lady Madeline had long been beyond the help of her doctors. She seemed to care about nothing. Slowly, her body had grown thin and weak, and often for a short period she would fall into a sleep of the dead. So far she had not been forced to stay in bed, but by the evening of that day that I had arrived at the house, the power of her destroyer, as her brother had told me that night, was too strong for her. I learned that my one sight of her would probably be the last I would have, that the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. For several days following, her name was not spoken by either the usher or myself, and during this period I was busy with efforts to lift my friend out of his sadness and gloom. We painted and read together, or listened, as if in a dream, to wild music that he played. And so, as a warmer and more loving friendship grew between us, I saw more clearly the uselessness of all attempts to bring happiness to a mind from which only darkness came, spreading upon all objects in the world its never-ending gloom. I shall always remember the hours I spent with the master of the House of Usher, yet I would fail in any attempt to give the idea of the true character of the things we did together. There was a strange light over everything. The paintings which he made me tremble, though I don't know why. To tell of them is beyond the power of written words. If ever a man painted an idea, that man was Roderick Usher. For me, at least, there came out of his pictures a sense of fear and wonder. One of those pictures may be told, although weakly in words. It showed the inside of a room where the dead might be placed, with low walls, white and plain. It seemed to be deep under the earth. There was no door, no window, no light or fire burned, yet a river of light flowed through it, filling it with a horrible, ghastly brightness. I've spoken that this sickly condition of the senses, which made most music painful for Usher to hear, the notes he could listen to with pleasure, were very few. It was this fact, perhaps, that made the music he played so different from most music, but the wild beauty of his playing could not be explained. The words of one of his songs, called The Haunted Palace, I have easily remembered. In it, I thought I saw for the first time that Usher knew very well that his mind was weakening. This song told of a great house where a king lived, a palace, in a green valley where all was light and color and beauty, and the air was sweet. In this palace, there were 2 bright windows through which people in the happy valley could hear music and could see smiling ghosts, spirits, moving around the king. The palace door was of the richest materials, in red and white. Through it came the other spirits whose only duty was to sing in their beautiful voices about how wise their king was. But a dark change came. The song continued, and now those who enter the valley see through the windows, in a red light, shapes that move to broken music, while through the door, now colorless, a ghastly river of ghosts, laughing but no longer smiling, rushes out forever. Our talk of this song led to another strange idea in Usher's mind. He believed that plants could feel and think, and not only plants, but rocks and water as well. He believed that the gray stones of the house and the small plants growing on the stones and the decaying trees had a power over him that made him what he was. Our books, the books which, for years, had fed the sick man's mind, were, as might be supposed, of this same wild character. Some of these books Usher sat and studied for hours. His chief delight was found in reading one very old book, written by some forgotten church, telling of the watch over the dead. At last, one evening, he told me that the Lady Madeline was alive no more. He said he was going to keep her body for some time in one of the many vaults inside the walls of the building. The worldly reason he gave for this was one with which I felt I had to agree. He had decided to do this because of the nature of her illness, because of the strange interest and questions of her doctors, and because of the great distance to the graveyard, where members of his family were placed in the earth. We too carried the body to its resting place. The vault in which we placed it was small and dark. In ages past it must have seen strange and bloody scenes. It lay deep down in the part of the building where I myself slept. The thick door was of iron, and because of its great weight, it made a loud, hard sound when it opened and closed. As we placed the Lady Madeline in this room of horror, I saw for the first time the great likeness between brother and sister, and Usher told me that they were twins. They had been born on the same day, and for that reason, the understanding between them had always been great, and the tie which held them together very strong. We looked at the dead face one last time, and was filled with wonder. As she lay there, the Lady Madeline looked not dead, but asleep, still soft and warm, though, to the touch, cold as the stones around us. Part 3. I was visiting an old friend of mine, Roderick Usher, in his old stone house, his palace, where a feeling of death hung on the air. I saw how fear was pressing on his heart and mind, and now his only sister, the Lady Madeline, had died, and we put her body in its resting place, in a room inside the cold walls of the palace, a damp, dark vault, a fearful place. As we looked down upon her face, I saw that there was a strong likeness between the two. Indeed, said Usher, we were born on the same day, and the tie between us has always been strong. We did not long look down at her face, for fear and wonder filled our hearts. There was still a little color in her face, and it seemed to be a smile on her lips. We closed the heavy iron door and returned to the rooms above, which were hardly less gloomy than the vault. And now a change came in the sickness of my friend's mind. He went from room to room with a hurried step. His face was, if possible, whiter and more ghastly than before, and the light in his eyes had gone. The trembling in his voice seemed to show the greatest fear. At times, he sat looking at nothing for hours, as if listening to some sound I could not hear. I felt his condition, slowly but certainly, gaining power over me. I felt that his wild ideas were becoming fixed in my own mind. As I was going to bed, late in the night of the 7th or the 8th day after we had placed the Lady Madeline within the vault, I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep did not come, while the hours had passed. My mind fought against the nervousness. I tried to believe that much, if not all, of what I felt was due to the gloomy room, to the dark wall coverings, which, in a rising wind, moved on the walls. But my efforts were useless. A trembling I could not stop filled my body, and fear without reason caught my heart. I sat up, looking into the darkness of my room, listening, I do not know why, to certain low sounds which came when the storm was quiet. A feeling of horror lay upon me like a heavy weight. I put on my clothes and began walking nervously around the room. I had been walking for a short time when I heard a light step coming toward the door. I knew it was Usher. In a moment, I saw him at my door. As usual, very white, but there was a wild laugh in his eyes. Even so, I was glad to have his company. "And have you not seen it?" he said. He hurried to one of the windows and opened it to the storm. The force of the entering wind nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a stormy but beautiful night, and wildly strange. The heavy, low-hanging clouds, which seemed to press down upon the house, flew from all directions against each other, always returning and never passing away in the distance. With their great thickness, they cut off all light from the moon and the stars, but we could see them because they were lighted from below by the air itself, which we could see rising from the dark lake and from the stones of the house itself. You shall not look out at this," I said to Usher, and I led him from the window to a seat. "This appearance, which surprises you so, has been seen in other places too. Perhaps the lake is the cause. Let us close the window. The air is cold. Here is one of the stories you like the best. I will read it, and you shall listen, and thus we will live through this fearful night together." The old book which I had picked up was written by a fool for fools to read, and it was not, in truth, the one that Usher liked. It was, however, the only one within easy reach. He seemed to listen quietly. Then I came to a part of the story in which a strong man full of wine, begins to break down a door, and the sound of the dry wood as it breaks can be heard through all the forest around him. Here I stopped, for it seemed to me that from some very distant part of the house sounds came to my ears, like those of which I had been reading. It must have been the likeness that had made me notice them, for the sounds themselves, with the storm still increasing, were nothing to stop or interest me. I continued the story, and read how the man, now entering through the broken door, discovers a strange and terrible animal, of the kind so often found in these old stories. He strikes it, and it falls, with such a cry that he has to close his ears with his hands. Here again I stopped. There could be no doubt. This time I did hear a distant sound, very much like the cry of the animal in the story. I tried to control myself so that my friend would see nothing of what I felt. I was not certain he had heard the sound, although he had clearly changed in some way. He had slowly moved his chair so that I could not see him well. I did not see that his lips were moving as if he were speaking to himself. His head had dropped forward, but I knew he was not asleep, for his eyes were open, and he was moving his body from side to side. I began reading again, and quickly came to a part of the story where a heavy piece of iron falls on a stone floor with a ringing sound. These words had just passed my lips when I heard clearly, but from afar away, a loud ringing sound, as if something of iron had indeed fallen heavily upon a stone floor, or as if an iron door had just closed. I lost control of myself completely and jumped up from my chair. Usher still sat, moving a little from side to side. His eyes were turned to the floor. I rushed to his chair. As I placed my hand on his shoulder, I felt that his whole body was trembling. A sickly smile touched his lips. He spoke in a low, quick, and nervous voice, as if he did not know I was there. "Yes," he said, "I heard it. Many minutes, many hours, many days I have heard it, but I dare not speak it. We have put her living in the vault. Did I not say that my senses were too strong? I heard her first movements many days ago, yet I dare not speak. And now that but the sounds were hers. Oh, where shall I run? She's coming to ask why I put her too soon. I hear the footsteps on the stairs. I hear the heavy beating of her heart." Here he jumped up and cried, as if he was giving up his soul, "I tell you, she stands now at the door." The great door to which he was pointing now slowly opened. It was the work of rushing wind, perhaps. But no. Outside that door, a shape did stand, a tall figure in grave clothes of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white dress, and the signs of her terrible efforts to escape the room were upon every part of her thin form. For a moment she remained trembling at the door. Then, with a low cry, she fell heavily upon her brother. In her pain, as she died at last, she carried him down with her, down to the floor. He too was dead, killed by his own fear. I rushed from the room. I rushed from the house. I ran. The storm was around me in all of its strength as I crossed the bridge. Suddenly, a wild light moved along the ground at my feet. I turned to see where it could have come from, for only the great house and its darkness were behind me. The light was that of the full moon, of a blood-red moon, which was now shining through a break in the front wall, that crack which I thought I had seen when I first saw the place. Then only a little crack. It now widened as I watched. A strong wind came rushing over me. The whole face of the moon appeared. I saw the great walls falling apart. There was a long and stormy shouting sound, and the deep black lake closed darkly over all that remained of the house of Usher.